The girl stared at her phone in disbelief, the faint sound of tapping echoing in the stairwell, as the screen notification displayed a shocking game over message, revealing her fatal encounter with a mysophobic man. She let out a frustrated scream and collapsed on the stairs, bewildered by the game's bizarre character settings. The scene shifted, and a black-haired man in a uniform turned his head, his gaze cold and scrutinizing. As the man asked if he was the one who had been summoned, the pink-haired girl struggled to hide her inner disgust. She froze in the hallway, her wide blue eyes revealing sudden confusion and shock. In the hallway, she stood silently beside the man with a powerful aura, the tension palpable as they stood in close proximity. Memories of her past life flooded her mind, filled with the heavy pressure of unmet expectations and a deep sadness. Images of verbal abuse at home and social isolation depicted her lonely struggle to find a sense of belonging. She sobbed quietly, wondering if the digital world was the only place she could finally find a little happiness. She glared resentfully at the man she considered the most arrogant in the entire game. The blinding headlights of a car foreshadowed a tragic end as she realized, too late, that a vehicle was speeding toward her. The shattered phone screen lay in the darkness, marking the end of her modern life. Waking up in an ornate bed, the girl with long pink hair realized she had survived the accident. Confusion turned to alarm as she touched her face, trying to comprehend this strange new reality. The mirror confirmed the impossible truth. She had possessed the body of a character from her favorite game. In search of answers, she frantically searched the room, trying to uncover any information about her new identity. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she began to piece together the life of the girl she now inhabited. She examined her hands, contemplating the strange and uncontrollable powers associated with her role as a guide. Memories of the world's mechanics revealed the physical contact required for a guide to stabilize a sentinel. With newfound determination, she resolved to build a life free from the main storyline. Her eyes sparkled with joy, seeing this accidental rebirth as a divine chance to finally achieve true happiness. However, her excitement vanished upon discovering that the character, Rose Valentine, had absolutely no wealth or status. Reality hit her hard when she found an empty ledger, realizing her new life would begin with zero funds. To survive the cost of living crisis, she began a grueling cycle of job hunting and interviews. Success brought a radiant smile as Rose proudly displayed her new employee ID. While securing lodging and meals and making plans, she decided to keep her identity as a guide a secret. She dreamed of a peaceful future, finding a gentle partner, and living a comfortable life. Her daydream was interrupted by a sudden call, heralding the arrival of a new, unexpected variable. A blonde woman relentlessly scolded her for getting the bathroom floor wet, forcing Rose to apologize. The woman's intense anger made Rose feel small and intimidated in their shared living space. Rose realized with a start that she was living with the game's true heroine, Irene. Irene, the very picture of beauty and grace, stood among the flowers, looking every bit the perfect template protagonist. Rose bowed deeply, hoping to maintain a good relationship with the surreal figure before her. A crack appeared in Irene's facade as she snapped at Rose, demanding she be more careful. Every late return became a source of dread, as Irene would be waiting to deliver a harsh reprimand. Even the slightest noise would draw a sharp glare, making the atmosphere incredibly tense. Rose cowered in fear, unable to tell if her beautiful roommate was the heroine or the villain. Tears of frustration welled up as she lamented the unexpected misery of her new life. Panic set in as Rose ran through the garden, fearing Irene's reaction to her tardiness. Standing before the dormitory, she hesitated, as if she could already hear the inevitable argument awaiting her. Tired of walking on eggshells, she paused outside the door, dreading the confrontation with her roommate. With a soft click, she decided to wait in the shadows until Irene finally fell asleep. Strolling through the moonlit garden, the cool breeze began to soothe her frayed nerves and anxiety. A sudden rustling in the bushes shattered the peace, putting her on high alert. Fear gripped her as she scanned the darkness, wondering if a dangerous mutant had breached the defenses. She spotted a figure leaning against a tree and gasped, seeing a man struggling to stay on his feet. Relief washed over her when she realized it was a person and not a monster lurking in the night. Watching the handsome man panting in the moonlight, Rose contemplated approaching her ideal type. Rose looked down with a hesitant expression, her heart filled with uncertainty as she watched the man struggle. The black-haired man collapsed heavily, prompting Rose to approach him cautiously with concern. The man was gasping for air, and Rose realized something was very wrong. Panic set in as Rose rushed to the fallen figure, her voice trembling as she asked if he was okay. Rose knelt beside him, urgently checking for injuries, while the man was clearly in extreme physical pain. By his uniform, Rose recognized the man as a sentinel suffering from a terrifying and dangerous power surge. A grim vision showed the immense destruction that would occur if the man's power went unchecked. Fear gripped Rose as she wondered what she alone could possibly do to stop the impending disaster. Rose suddenly remembered her identity as a guide, realizing she finally had the power to help him. She tentatively reached out, doubting if she could successfully guide him after hiding her ability for so long. The man continued to groan in pain, his sweat-drenched face reflecting his intense inner torment. Rose decided to act immediately, focusing her energy and placing her hands firmly on the man's back. A brilliant light marked the beginning of the guiding process as Rose channeled her power into him. Rose breathed a sigh of relief as she felt the guiding connection begin to take effect on the struggling man. The man's hand suddenly gripped her arm tightly, his sudden burst of renewed strength startling her. Rose was pulled into a powerful embrace, trying to soothe the man despite her own growing confusion. He lifted her head, and a tense, silent moment passed between them in the quiet, moonlit garden. Shock rendered Rose speechless as the man suddenly leaned in, initiating a deep and forceful kiss. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the surreal moment unfolded, the world around her blurring. The man exhaled softly during the kiss, his unstable energy beginning to stabilize through her touch. Rose struggled to find her words, but her attempt to speak was cut off by the man's overwhelming and sudden advance. She noticed the blood on his lips, realizing the encounter had become physically intense and unexpectedly painful. Rose pulled back, her face flushed with embarrassment at the sudden, shocking turn of events. Rose apologized frantically, checking his condition while trying to process the implications of the unexpected kiss. The man stared at her with glowing red eyes, his expression far more focused than before. He insisted he was fine and demanded she continue, sending Rose into an absolute panic. Rose tried to stall, but the man pulled her hand closer, as if desperate for her touch. She offered to call a supervisor for help, but the man seemed completely fixated on her alone. His surprising strength made it impossible for her to break free, trapping her firmly in his grasp. Rose looked at him in utter confusion, unable to comprehend the man's sudden and forceful behavior. The man's tone turned pleading as he begged for more guiding, showing her a vulnerable side. Rose was shocked that he was now asking for permission, reassessing his earlier, more aggressive actions. Seeing his vulnerable state, Rose gently cupped the man's face, and he leaned into her hand. She finally agreed to guide him, her eyes showing determination as she accepted the daunting task. The man continued to pant heavily, his flushed face revealing the physical toll of the ongoing power surge. Rose continued the guiding kiss, lamenting how quickly her simple life had changed tonight. During the intimate contact, she accidentally touched the cut on his lip, causing her to gasp. This intimate act was a necessary measure to prevent a catastrophic and fatal power surge. They remained locked in an embrace as the garden bloomed around them. Under the soft moonlight, a sudden realization struck Rose, and she pulled back with a shocked and startled expression. She remembered they were outdoors, vulnerable to being seen by any passerby, and panic set in. The fear of social ruin plagued her as she imagined the cruel gossip that would follow. Rose tried to bid him farewell, but the man refused to release his hold on her waist. She pleaded with him to let go, assuring him that rescue for the Sentinel was surely on its way. The man let out a frustrated sigh, looking hurt as she continued to resist his persistent grip. He watched her intently, seemingly worried about their sudden and forced separation. Rose gave him one last, quick kiss before managing to break free from his embrace. She bid a hasty farewell, desperate to escape the scene before her social reputation was ruined. Rose ran off into the distance, her pink hair flowing behind her as the man watched her go. The scene shifted to a blonde man and a short-haired woman, illustrating the importance of satisfaction during the guiding process. Rose recalled the previous night's kiss, admitting it felt good and hinting at a high compatibility between them. A shimmering vision depicted the sensation of guiding, like clear spring water flowing over the point of skin contact. Rose touched her lips, wondering with an expectant look if she would ever see the handsome man again. Rose was overjoyed, fantasizing that the man might come looking for her after regaining his senses. A sudden collision in the crowded hall broke her reverie, with the blonde Irene scolding Rose for being clumsy. Rose winced in pain, while Irene noted that the center was packed despite everyone's exhaustion today. Rose tapped a man on the shoulder to ask about the commotion, getting his attention. In the hall, men were gossiping about an out-of-control S-Class sentinel who was subdued by a mysterious guide the previous night. Rose recalled the intimate embrace with the stranger, blushing as she realized the gossip was definitely about her. Her wide blue eyes filled with disbelief as Rose processed the terrifying revelation that the man was S-Class. The narration revealed there were only 4 S-Class sentinels in total, describing the man as having hair darker than the night. Rose realized that among the elite quartet, only one specific man fit that dark description. A striking portrait of Claude Dunhart revealed his sharp gaze and the small, lingering cut on his lip. Panic set in as Rose recognized Claude Dunhart as the worst and most dangerous villain in the entire game. The scene shifted to the main hall, where Claude stood prominently, surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers. Claude rejected another potential candidate, his sharp tone reflecting his frustration in the search for a guide. Claude spotted Rose and Irene from a distance, questioning why they had been loitering there since morning. Rose was in awe of Irene's composure, noticing she was completely unfazed in Claude's presence. A wave of regret washed over Rose, horrified that she had failed to recognize the world's most dangerous villain last night. A security guard bowed deeply as Claude's subordinate inquired about the identity of the person from last night. The guard apologized nervously, explaining that the person had fled too quickly after curfew for him to get a clear look at their face. The terrified guard, sweating profusely, explained that the person vanished so fast he couldn't even tell if they were human. Claude's glowing red eyes narrowed as he questioned how the guard could have missed the guide's features. A suppressed, dark aura emanated from Claude as he issued a chilling threat to the terrified guard. Rose flinched, the heavy atmosphere reminding her of the immense danger she would face if her identity were exposed. Fear gripped Rose as she realized the powerful and vengeful Claude was now actively hunting for her. The narration explained Claude's special status as the game's final boss and a legendary national hero of Artaion. A flashback depicted the other 3 S-Class sentinels who awakened as adults, contrasting with Claude's unique history. The screen showed a young Claude, highlighting his early awakening and his long-standing, fearsome reputation. An adult Claude stood over a destroyed city, established as the S-Class leader and the absolute justice of Artaion. Rose realized that if such a powerful figure was hunting her, she would eventually be caught. Despite her efforts, the image of their kiss was juxtaposed with Claude's bloody past, emphasizing the grave mistake Rose had made. Irene scoffed that the mysterious guide was foolish for causing so much trouble by not revealing their identity. Irene argued that the center could easily find the guide if simple features like hair color were provided. Rose panicked internally, wondering if Claude's memory was truly distorted enough from the power surge to forget her features. Onlookers speculated that Claude must have been hallucinating, while Rose watched the scene unfold with growing anxiety. An instructional chart explained that sensory distortion during a power surge could make a sentinel mistake an elephant for a squirrel. Rose clutched her head in despair, lamenting that her vibrant pink hair was too distinctive to possibly be forgotten. Rose tried to pull Irene away, but was interrupted by a sudden, authoritative voice claiming responsibility. A brown-haired girl with glasses and pigtails stepped forward, approaching Claude with a determined yet humble expression. The girl in the checkered apron begged for forgiveness, boldly claiming to be the person Claude was looking for. Rose watched in stunned silence, bewildered that a complete stranger would step up and lie in her place. The girl boldly insisted that she was the one who guided Claude yesterday, leaving the crowd and a confused Rose in absolute disbelief. The pigtail girl blushed furiously, a reaction that made Rose wonder if the stranger truly harbored a crush on Claude. Rose recalled Claude's hidden violent nature, knowing he could snap someone's neck when truly irritated. The strange girl stood before Claude, completely unaware that her secret act of taking Rose's place was inviting mortal danger. Claude coldly dismissed the girl's claim, calling her lie too clumsy and pathetic to even warrant a response. Rose gasped as Claude's sharp gaze suddenly shifted, locking eyes with her across the crowded hall. Rose felt a sudden, intense surge of guiding energy, suggesting someone had finally recognized her hidden ability. Fear struck Rose as she realized her guiding power might have accidentally leaked, exposing her true nature to Claude. Rose woke up with a start, clutching her chest as she replayed a vivid and unsettling dream. Irene interrupted Rose's thoughts, warning her that she was late for the upcoming simulation training class at the center. Claude Dunhart sat with a commanding presence, his sharp gaze and refined attire demanding absolute attention and respect. Rose froze in place, horrified to find herself in the same room as the dangerous man she had encountered last night. Irene noticed Claude's intense stare, while a panicked Rose tried to dismiss the observation as a delusion. Claude's glowing red eyes remained fixed in a cold stare, his expression unreadable yet undeniably threatening as he watched the room. An instructional chart showed the rigors of simulation training, where Sentinels learned to fight mutants accompanied by their assigned guides. Claude observed the training with a detached and superior air, his presence like that of a professor joining an undergraduate project. Irene called out to Rose, who was still in shock from Claude's unexpected and overwhelming proximity. Today, Irene teased Rose about the tense atmosphere, while Rose internally panicked over the painful secret they shared. Exhausted and anxious, Rose leaned on the table, already planning her escape via a transfer or an immediate leave of absence. The sudden call for Rashi snapped the pink-haired Rose back to reality, and she clutched her documents tightly. The instructor assigned the newly arrived guides to various groups, ignoring the fact that one of the groups was already full. Rose's heart sank as she realized she had been assigned directly to Claude's training group. A sharp creak sounded as Rose's heart pounded, filled with absolute dread at the thought of facing Claude. A fierce battle unfolded in the simulation training, with a Sentinel delivering a powerful blow to a massive mutant. Claude watched the spectacle with glowing red eyes, seemingly unimpressed and bored by the amateurish display before him. Claude rudely rejected another Sentinel's offer of assistance, coldly ordering them to get lost. A close-up on Claude's face highlighted his sharp features and the cold, unyielding intensity in his crimson eyes. Rose found Claude's arrogant behavior in a beginner's training class to be ridiculous and unnecessary. The other girls, however, gushed over Claude's rank and looks, though someone noted his trashy personality canceled out his perfect face. The gossiping guide discussed how Claude was searching for the mysterious person who saved him during his previous fatal power surge. They speculated that only a high-ranking guide like Shauna or Raznek could be the legendary figure he was looking for. A shimmering portrait depicted the black-haired Raznek and the purple-haired Shauna, considered elite candidates for Claude Dunhart. The purple-haired Sentinel, Bellin, mocked Claude behind his back, calling him a flawed and lonely man who lacked a guide. Bellin boasted of his own inner strength, claiming superiority over those who relied solely on their rank. A guide with a ponytail threatened to report Bellin for harassment if he continued his disrespectful and arrogant behavior. Bellin was left speechless after being reminded of his failure to achieve the elite status of S-Class. Bellin turned his anger on the guide, insulting her and comparing her looks to the perfection of an S-Class. Enraged and insulted, Bellin yelled at the woman, blaming her for daring to mock a powerful, high-ranking sentinel like him. Another man tried to stop the furious Bellin, urging him to calm down before his temper caused serious trouble. The narration described the extremely high social status of sentinels, who were revered by the public for their incredible power and heroic identity. A shimmering portrait showed a blonde man and a purple-haired woman, representing an ideal and successful sentinel-guide partnership. An enraged Bellin watched jealously as other sentinels received praise and attention from their respective guides. Rose watched with concern, her profile reflecting a deep worry about the unstable and aggressive personnel around her. Bellin approached Rose with a suspicious look, questioning what she was writing so diligently in her notes during training. Rose sighed wearily, her frustration with Bellin's constant interruptions and arrogance clear on her face. Bellin aggressively closed in on Rose, furious at being ignored by someone he considered a mere guide. He mocked Rose, calling her a useless commoner and questioning where she got the audacity to do so. A small ball of fire ignited in Bellin's palm, a dangerous and unauthorized display of power meant to intimidate the unsuspecting Rose. Bellin approached with a sinister smile, bringing his fiery power dangerously close to Rose's panicked face. Rose trembled in fear, pleading with the madman to calm down while clutching her folder tightly. The narration explained that in a world full of monsters, ordinary people without abilities remained at the bottom of the food chain. Onlookers watched the conflict with amusement, considering the brutal attack on a non-ability user an entertaining show. Rose was stunned by the cruel reality that in this harsh society that revered power, she was considered powerless and expendable. Rose let out a terrified scream as the flames danced in the air around her, the heat becoming dangerously unbearable. Bellin prepared to strike again, a fireball flickering in his hand as he mocked her supposed weakness. He stood over the fallen Rose, telling her to remember the greatness of sentinels through this painful lesson. Rose looked back desperately, tears welling in her eyes, wondering how she could possibly survive this attack. Rose trembled all over, realizing her legs wouldn't move, trapping her in place, unable to escape the madman's power. Bellin's hand ignited with flames as he sneered, warning the pink-haired girl that her pathetic act wouldn't save her. Rose's eyes widened in terror, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames, wondering what would happen next. A sudden force grabbed the purple-haired Bellin, causing him to cry out and demand to know who had seized him. With a thud, Bellin was slammed violently to the ground, coughing up blood as a massive wave of purple energy overwhelmed him. Onlookers stared in disbelief, while Rose wondered who could so easily subdue the aggressive Bellin. Claude stood in the shadows, his glowing hand revealing him as the one who had effortlessly suppressed the arrogant sentinel. Rose was confused, wondering how Claude had appeared in the rear so quickly after fighting golems on the front line. Claude looked down with cold indifference, rebuking the fallen Bellin as pathetic, his red eyes filled with contempt. Claude declared the training over and prepared to leave, but his sharp gaze lingered on Rose for a brief, tense moment. Claude ordered the other sentinels to take care of Rose, who was stunned by his unexpected and authoritative command. Rose remained on the ground, documents scattered around her as she tried to process her narrow escape from the chaos. Rose mulled over the strange series of events, noting that Claude had joined her group and even protected her from being bullied. Rose noticed shimmering dust on the rocks, which her colleague explained was golem dust, a clear sign of Claude's power. Rose panicked, worried she had annoyed Claude and feared she would be crushed like his enemies. Rose recalled how Claude had humiliated Bellin earlier, realizing the S-Class hero possessed a truly cold and vengeful nature. Bellin struggled to his feet, seething with jealousy and rage, as the others prepared to leave him behind and return. Rose suddenly looked back, her expression turning to confusion as a strange sound echoed behind her. The enraged Bellin lost his mind, screaming at Rose and demanding to know if she was still laughing at him. Bellin vowed to crush everyone with falling rocks, his mind twisted by a petty and violent desire for revenge. Bang! Bellin unleashed a massive and reckless blast of energy, while a colleague carried Rose away from the growing danger. The cave began to groan and crack, and Rose realized with horror that the entire structure was about to collapse. An urgent voice ordered everyone to take cover as a dark figure was engulfed in a swirling, intense crimson aura. Driven by pure madness, Bellin screamed for everyone to die while continuing his reckless assault on the group. Claude appeared before the berserk Bellin and coldly ordered him to shut up as purple energy began to suppress the area. Bellin struggled under the invisible pressure, yelling at the S-Class to let go, but he remained trapped by Claude's power. Claude stared at his own glowing palm, observing Bellin's rampage with a detached, judgmental, and supremely superior air. Thud! After Claude effortlessly extinguished his reckless power, Bellin collapsed to the ground, completely subdued and unconscious. Rose watched in stunned silence, finally witnessing the truly terrifying scale of power wielded by an elite S-Class Sentinel. A colleague warned that the ground was weakening and urgently asked if anyone had brought an escape scroll for the group. Rose confirmed she had the scroll, but pleaded with the man to put her down so she could find it. Rose froze in horror when she realized her scroll could only cover 10 people, but their group currently had 12 members. Rose looked around desperately, asking if any Sentinel had teleportation abilities to accommodate the extra people in danger. Rose's eyes lit up with sudden hope as she realized there was someone on site who could solve their problem. Claude stood silently with his arms crossed, his inscrutable and commanding presence causing the surrounding guides to gasp in surprise. Claude closed his eyes, seemingly annoyed by the delay, as the group waited for him to decide on a course of action. When a man took Rose's documents, she protested, but he insisted that returning the guides safely was their top priority. A firm hand snatched the escape scroll from the pile, signaling that their evacuation plan was finally set in motion. The man ordered the group to hold on tight to the unconscious Bellin, preparing to activate the scroll and teleport them away. Tears streamed down Rose's face, terrified at the thought of being left behind in the collapsing cave with a monster that was Claude. With a thud, Rose fell to her knees as the teleportation light faded, realizing she had been left behind, just as she had feared. Rose laments her cruel fate, crying that she was abandoned by the others, who even took the injured Bellin with them. An imperceptible smile plays on Claude's lips as he recalls the fear-filled words Rose had just shouted. Just moments ago, Claude had looked down on the sobbing Rose, mockingly asking if her comment about a monster was truly about him. Petrified with terror, Rose stares at the intimidating Claude with wide blue eyes, realizing she has made a huge mistake. Rose tearfully begs for forgiveness, cowering before the annoyed and powerful S-Class Esper, Claude. Claude turns to walk away, while the pink-haired Rose desperately pleads for him to wait and take her with him. Rose's inner monologue emphasizes the gravity of misspeaking in front of the world's most dangerous and powerful man. A sudden echo reverberates through the cave, and rubble begins to fall, causing Rose to let out a terrified scream. In a moment of sheer desperation, Rose rushes forward and clings tightly to Claude's arm, burying her face in him. Claude's red eyes flash with sudden anger as he harshly questions how she dares to touch his body. Claude shoves Rose away as the dangerous cave structure continues to groan and crumble behind them. Rose feels her pride wounded as the perfectionist Claude immediately brushes off the spot on his uniform where her hand had touched. The fantasy of a romantic embrace contrasts sharply with Rose's current fear that Claude will abandon her. To survive the collapse, a tearful Rose vows to find a way to escape with him. Rose points an accusatory finger, warning the black-haired Claude that he will regret it if he abandons the one who guided him. Claude closes in on Rose with glowing red eyes, threatening that he will not spare her if she is lying. Rose realizes she was too heated just now, but she remains firm to ensure her own safety. Elsewhere, a blonde woman is questioning two men who are sweating profusely as they search for a lame excuse for something that has clearly angered her. The blonde woman's face is etched with worry as she calls out Rose's name while searching the facility. With a thud, the pink-haired Rose falls to the ground, crying out as she is reunited with her colleague who had been anxiously searching for her. The blonde woman gasps in horror, cupping Rose's face and noticing how haggard she looks after the ordeal. Claude interrupts the reunion, coldly ordering Rose to stop wasting time and speak with him at once. The blonde woman glares at Claude, firmly telling him to wait, as Rose is clearly hurt and needs to rest. Claude, indifferent to Rose's plight, claims that no matter how tired she is now, he has a promise that must be kept. Rose tries to describe the mysterious guide she saw, recalling a slender figure with long brown or black hair. Claude stares at Rose with skeptical red eyes, questioning if this meager description is truly all she can offer. In a fluster, Rose insists that even such a description is enough to narrow down the search. Two men suddenly grab Rose from behind, leaving her confused and alarmed by their actions. Claude stares at her coldly, announcing that he cannot rely on her word alone and needs a more direct identification process. Under Claude's strict orders, Rose is taken away by the two men to continue the investigation elsewhere immediately. Hours pass, and a dazed Rose sits in an office, forced to identify the guide from various files. Claude watches from the side with his arms crossed, ordering his subordinate to stay focused while continuing the arduous identification task. Rose sighs wearily, noting that despite hours of work, none of the guides brought in matched the mysterious person. Claude points to the desk, indicating that the man currently sitting in front of Rose is the last potential candidate. Claude speculates that the guide is an unregistered civilian, but a colleague counters that this possibility is extremely low. Rose stands up in frustration, pleading to be let go after spending days checking all possible guides. At the center of it all, Claude retorts that she should have gotten a clear look, earning a silent and humiliated glare from the girl. Rose snaps back, arguing that it was impossible to observe carefully in a life-threatening situation like the recent cave collapse. Claude points out Rose's lack of restraint, while she, desperate to end the ordeal, agrees to provide further assistance. A sudden visitor breaks the tense atmosphere, drawing the attention of both Claude and a weary, startled Rose. A man with light blonde hair named Oscar enters the room, his bright, charming smile filling the space with warm energy. Oscar jokes about the rumors of Claude going crazy and asks what exactly is tormenting the great S-class hero. Oscar looks toward Rose with a curious gaze, noting that this is not the scene he had expected. Rose blushes and shyly greets Oscar, her heart fluttering at the sight of the exceptionally handsome newcomer. Oscar leans in and gently touches a strand of Rose's hair, smiling as he compliments its lovely pink color. Rose suddenly recognizes the man, her eyes widening as she recalls a specific role in the story she had read. Rose remembers that Oscar is a popular character known for his kind charm and handsome appearance. In a playful chibi scene, Oscar teases Claude about hiding a cute chick, which the annoyed S-class Esper dismisses. Oscar crouches down to Rose's eye level, his gentle presence a stark contrast to Claude's cold and harsh personality. The light blonde-haired man introduces himself as Oscar to the pink-haired Rose in a warm, polite tone. Placing a hand on his chest, Oscar politely asks if Rose would be so kind as to tell him her name. In response, Rose breaks into a radiant smile and introduces herself to Oscar as Rose Valentine. Oscar chuckles softly, complimenting Rose on her lovely name, while she thanks him for the praise. Claude stands behind the blonde woman, pressing Rose for her name, while she, clutching a folder, looks back with a nervous and startled expression. Rose laments that she was so terrified she couldn't even answer Claude properly. Claude turns away with a disdainful look, leaving Rose to watch him with lingering fear. Rose is surprised by Oscar's friendly laughter, finding his approachable nature much more comforting than the S-class Esper's coldness. Oscar looks back with a cold, serious expression, confirming with someone off-screen that the girl is indeed a civilian. Rose is taken aback by Oscar's sudden shift in attitude as he complains about wasting time on her. With a scornful smile, Oscar questions why Claude is mixing with a non-ability user and wonders if she is his type. Oscar deems Rose too plain to stand beside Claude, which immediately earns him her visible annoyance. Rose suddenly notices Oscar's short brown hair, which perfectly matches her description of the mysterious guide. A triumphant glint appears in Rose's eyes as she confidently declares that she has finally found the guide they were looking for. Both Claude and Oscar show shock and disbelief as Rose makes this bold and unexpected identification. Claude glares sternly at the pink-haired girl, questioning if she is deliberately trying to deceive him with a lie. Rose remains unfazed, a smug smile on her face as she insists her identification of the guide is completely accurate. Rose dramatically points at Oscar, accusing him of being the one who provided the guidance on that fateful day. Oscar looks stunned and starts to sweat nervously as Rose cites his short brown hair as undeniable proof. Oscar laughs nervously, stammering a denial to Claude that he has ever guided him in the past. Oscar is sent flying as Claude coldly orders him to leave the room at once. Claude clutches his head in apparent pain, while Rose watches with her arms crossed, satisfied by his obvious distress. Rose observes Claude with deep suspicion as he begins muttering some incomprehensible, dark thoughts to himself. Claude speaks of the past in a low, trance-like voice, prompting a confused Rose to demand an immediate explanation. Surrounded by illusory flowers, Claude touches his own face, haunted by the lingering and vivid memory of Rose's lips. Rose watches as Claude turns away, clearly flustered after hearing her detailed and blunt assessment of his lips. Rose continues her explanation, completely unaware of the deep psychological torment she is inflicting on the brooding, black-haired Esper. Rose playfully suggests that Claude should just kiss Oscar to definitively verify the guide's true identity. Rose declares her mission complete and makes a hasty, panicked escape from the increasingly awkward situation. A gentle hand shakes Rose awake, and with a groan, she finally regains consciousness from her long and exhausting ordeal. The blonde Irene looks down with deep concern, her angelic appearance being the first thing Rose sees upon waking. Irene scolds a chibi-style Rose for disappearing, which makes the pink-haired girl feel safe and greatly comforted. Rose recounts her experience of being used as a human detector, though she privately worries about the huge lie she told Claude. Rose puts on a brave face, trying to convince herself that everything has been resolved and she is safe. Rose finds solace in the little things, feeling refreshed by the simple fragrance of her clean school uniform. Irene remains skeptical about the supposed solution, but her constant nagging is a dear and familiar sound to Rose. Upon hearing that steak is for lunch, Rose jumps up in excitement, much to Irene's visible annoyance. A hummed tune fills the air as Rose happily skips away, leaving Irene calling out futilely behind her. Rose freezes in place, her heart sinking as she recognizes the familiar, cold voice calling out to her. Claude stands before Rose with his arms crossed, exuding a terrifying, grim, and extremely displeased aura. Claude's red eyes flash intensely as he accuses Rose of playing a dangerous game of deception with him. Rose gasps, imagining the horrifying image of Claude and Oscar kissing, and recalls the S-Class Esper's extreme aversion to physical contact. Claude stares her down, his sharp gaze confirming that he is absolutely certain Oscar is not his secret guide. Claude demands to know the absolute truth, causing the small, trembling Rose to fear that her life is finally over. The vision of the kiss resurfaces, and Rose realizes her suggestion was indeed absurd, given Claude's touch-averse nature. Claude's focus narrows in on Rose as he struggles between her lies and his own memories. Rose cringes in fear, horrified by the unsettling possibility that Claude actually tried to test her kissing theory. Desperate and tearful, Rose pleads her innocence, claiming his current accusations are completely unfair and baseless. Claude coldly orders her to shut up, trusting his own intuition over her increasingly frantic and unreliable protests. Rose recalls details from the original story, remembering that Claude suffers from a severe and painful guiding allergy. A vision of needles explains Claude's condition, where even the slightest guiding contact causes him immense physical pain. Rose realizes Claude's allergy makes physical contact impossible and plans to use this fact to escape his interrogation. To prove her point, Rose proposes a high-stakes bet to the intimidating, black-haired man. Rose holds her ground with newfound confidence, ready to manipulate the situation to ensure her continued safety. Elsewhere, Oscar is laughing in a hallway, surrounded by female fans, completely unaware of the impending confrontation. Oscar turns with a curious expression as Rose approaches and interrupts his popular and crowded social gathering. Oscar is surprised by the summons, noting that it's rare for Claude to seek him out. Steady, rhythmic footsteps echo as the two walk together through the facility's quiet corridors. Oscar teases that Rose is nothing to Claude, causing the pink-haired girl to become flustered and defensive. Oscar observes Rose with a playful smile, mentioning that Claude has never been seen around women before. Oscar laughs at the thought of Claude liking petite girls, which provokes a defensive reaction from the height-sensitive Rose. Oscar approaches a surprised Rose with a teasing smile, his bright, light blonde hair catching the light in the hallway. Rose reflects on Oscar's sudden change in attitude after discovering her civilian status, finding his behavior incomprehensible. In a playful chibi scene, Rose wonders how Oscar knew what she was thinking, and he replies that people say that often. Oscar bursts out laughing as Rose feels a dizzying wave of annoyance, certain that he is the only one who doesn't understand. The sound of heavy footsteps suddenly arrives as Claude appears in the foreground, his presence immediately cutting off their light-hearted conversation. Claude closes the distance, approaching Oscar with a grim intensity that causes the light, blonde-haired man to stammer in confusion. Rose giggles while Claude demands to know why the two of them are standing uncomfortably close. Claude's expression remains icy as he reminds Rose that his life is riding on their high-stakes agreement. Rose smothers a laugh, pleased to see the formidable Claude and the popular Oscar caught in such an awkward standoff. Oscar asks if Claude has been dragged into a strange bed, referring to the pink-haired girl as Shorty. Oscar continues to tease Rose, calling her Bean Girl, which stirs her inner fury as she vows to wipe the smile off his face. Claude, with his back to them, looks out the window and commands silence, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative tone. An unsettling silence falls as the three of them stand in a tense and deadlocked confrontation in a kitchen area. Oscar breaks the silence, admitting that Claude's strange behavior is giving him goosebumps and asking if he can finally leave. Claude slowly adjusts his pristine white gloves, coldly stating that he brought Oscar here for a more definitive purpose. Oscar notes how averse to physical contact Claude used to be, which makes the black-haired man's current approach all the more suspicious and alarming. A sharp rustle is heard as Claude suddenly reaches out and grabs the collar of Oscar's green shirt with his gloved hand. Surrounded by a background of gag flowers, Claude leans close to Oscar's face, leaving the light blonde-haired man completely stunned. In a chibi scene, Oscar panics and desperately pushes Claude away as the S-Class Esper tries to lean in for a kiss. Oscar protests loudly while Claude holds his face, frantically asking if the black-haired man has eaten something strange. Rose watches the chaotic scene with a satisfied smile, thinking that Oscar should have known better. Oscar continues to struggle against Claude's grip, loudly declaring that he only provides guiding services for female espers. Oscar screams in terror, begging Claude to move his mouth away, while the black-haired man continues his unsettlingly silent advance. With a thud, Claude roughly shoves Oscar to the floor, unable to bring himself to follow through with Rose's absurd verification theory. Oscar sits on the floor and sighs in relief, glad that the terrifying ordeal is finally over. Claude clenches his fist in frustration, while Rose smugly concludes that she has won the bet since he couldn't do it. Rose looks down at the dejected Claude, sensing a hint of vulnerability beneath his usual cold exterior for the first time. A brown-haired man with glasses named Azir introduces himself as a senior from the pharmacy department, and with a friendly smile, Azir explains to Rose that it's normal for them in the guide support division to help out understaffed departments. Walking down the pristine facility corridors, Azir assures Rose that he will send her back soon once her task is complete. Rose stops to look at a mysterious door and, driven by growing curiosity, asks Azir what lies behind it. Azir looks back at Rose, telling her that the room belongs to a very important person visiting today. As Azir opens the door, Rose hesitates on the threshold, questioning if she is allowed to enter such a restricted area. Rose gasps in surprise to find Claude lying on a medical bed, pale and weak, and breathing with difficulty. Dark, swirling patterns in the room reflect Rose's inner turmoil at seeing the powerful S-Class Esper in such a state. Rose leans closer to observe the sleeping Claude, wondering if the formidable man is truly unconscious despite his immense power. Azir playfully suggests that Rose should take this chance to get back at the sleeping Claude for all the trouble he's been causing her lately. Rose worries about the danger of waking him, but Azir nonchalantly assures her that Claude is fast asleep. With Claude still motionless, Azir explains that he was given a large dose of sleeping pills to cope with the nauseating guiding treatment. Rose clutches her folder, skeptical that simple sleeping pills could have such a profound effect on a high-ranking S-Class Esper. Azir shrugs, admitting they have little choice in order to manage the intense strain of Claude's condition. A dark vision of a core explosion illustrates the terrifying reality. Without proper guiding, Claude's power will eventually destroy him. Surrounded by a swirling purple aura, Claude is a man born with all the wealth and power one could imagine. Rose finds it deeply ironic that the very power everyone envies is the same thing that is slowly killing him. Azir explains that survival is a constant struggle for Claude, though he immediately apologizes for sharing such grim details with Rose. Rose recalls the memory of Claude hiding his pain, realizing the arrogant man has been living with a deep, life-threatening burden all along. A vision of a building engulfed in flames serves as a brutal reminder of the destruction caused by Claude's previous rampage. The horrific memory of the massacre from the original story plays out, showing the fallen bodies of Irene and the other male leads. Rose looks at Claude with new eyes, realizing she can no longer hate him if he is truly just as desperate. Claude looks up at Rose from the bed, his voice weak as he apologizes for running away and using his condition. Rose gently pats Claude's forehead, hoping the powerful man will feel a little better after he wakes from his sleep. Rose's fingertips emit a faint glow as she makes brief, accidental guiding contact with the sleeping S-Class Esper. Rose recoils in disbelief, her blue eyes wide with the realization that the impossible guiding connection actually happened. A startled Rose drops her files and blames it on static electricity, while Azir watches her with a confused expression. Rose gives a polite bow with a strained smile, preparing to make a quick exit from the hospital room. Clutching her folder, Rose sweats profusely, wondering why her guiding seems to work only on Claude. In the hallway, a sudden, sharp whoosh signals the approach of a powerful presence toward the unsuspecting pink-haired girl. Rose turns in alarm as an authoritative voice cuts through the silence, warning her to be careful. Rose's heart pounds nervously, worried that her accidental guiding might have prematurely awakened the resting S-Class Esper. Claude's gloved hand grips his own wrist as he calls out Rose Valentine's name with cold precision. Claude closes in on the flustered Rose, demanding to know if she is indeed the secret guide he has been searching for. Claude roughly grabs Rose's wrist, prompting her to fear that her identity as a guide has finally been exposed. Claude looks directly into her eyes, his intense gaze rendering the small girl weak and unable to look away. Claude's red eyes flash with suspicion as he accuses her of using tricks to hide her true nature. In an attempt to escape, Rose urges him to find a professional guide qualified to help him. Claude's face is grim as he tightens his grip on her arm, coldly asserting that he will not fall for the same trap twice. Standing close, Claude points out that Rose was present during both of his mysterious guiding incidents. Claude leans in to ask if she expects him to believe it's all a mere coincidence as she panics. A dangerous smile plays on Claude's lips as he decides he no longer needs any verbal explanation from her. Rose's face flushes red as Claude reminds her of her previous suggestion about verification through a kiss. Claude lifts Rose's chin, his gaze momentarily softening as he prepares to test her absurd theory himself. A small mascot appears as Claude recalls Rose's previous words about identifying a guide through direct physical contact. Rose becomes breathless and freezes on the spot as Claude suddenly pulls her into an unexpectedly intimate embrace. Claude cups Rose's face, ordering her to stop talking and focus entirely on him in this intense moment. Papers scatter across the floor as Claude leans down and takes Rose's breath away in a surprisingly deep kiss. Claude's red eyes remain focused and intense as he experiences the sensation of a kiss for the first time. In the pristine hallway, the two are surrounded by blooming pink roses, locked in a romantic embrace. The sound of a steady heartbeat is heard as Rose's eyes widen in utter shock, her mind racing from the unexpected contact. Rose feels terrified and overwhelmed, fearing that this intimate contact will undeniably prove she is his secret guide. The two stand in heavy silence, the air thick with the aftermath of the kiss. Rose, blushing furiously, covers her mouth, her hand trembling slightly as she processes the sudden turn of events. Rose tries to convince herself that she should be happy, as this outcome was technically part of her plan. Claude asks if she saw any other intruders, causing Rose to stammer as she desperately searches for an excuse. Rose hides her face, realizing with dread that Claude's sharp intuition means he will never stop suspecting her. Swallowing her guilt, Rose decides she must tell another lie to maintain her safety and keep her distance from the S-Class Esper. Claude looks skeptical, repeating her claim that there was indeed someone else in the room earlier that day. Rose concocts a story about bumping into a mysterious woman who was rushing out of the room. To complete her lie, Rose describes the fictional guide as having short brown hair, thereby misdirecting Claude's search. Rose lowers her head in relief, believing her quick thinking has finally put an end to the terrifying interrogation. Azir, holding his equipment, informs a surprised Rose that Claude has summoned her again today. In a playful scene, Azir pats Rose on the head as she cries over her failed attempt to escape Claude's attention. Rose bids farewell to her senior, lamenting her lack of power as a low-ranking staff member at the facility. Azir watches Rose leave with a curious expression, noting her distress over the persistent black-haired man. Rose offers a sweet, polite smile of gratitude before setting off to fulfill her unavoidable duty to Claude. Walking through the facility, Rose wonders what Claude wants and dreads the new lies she will have to tell today. The memory of Claude's kiss lingers vividly in Rose's mind as she prepares for their next tense meeting. A soft creak is heard as Rose carefully pushes the door open, greeting the person inside with a nervous expression. Rose gasps in surprise to see a woman with short brown hair standing confidently beside a seated Claude. Claude adjusts his gloves with a cold, knowing look, acknowledging Rose's entry into the room. Rose's eyes widen as she realizes her lie has manifested into a real person right before her. Rose stares in disbelief at the brown-haired woman, who looks exactly like the person she fabricated. Fearing her elaborate deception might be exposed, Rose breaks into a cold sweat and swallows hard. Claude tells Rose to come in, prompting a trembling response from her as she steps inside. The brown-haired woman casts a sharp, suspicious gaze, making the atmosphere in the room incredibly tense. A wave of fear washes over Rose as she wonders if the woman is glaring at her on purpose. The brown-haired woman stands with her arms crossed, maintaining a stern and unapproachable expression as she observes Rose. Claude recalls Rose's earlier claim of bumping into a mysterious woman before entering the hospital room. Rose notices that while the height and hair color match her lie, the woman's hairstyle is slightly different. Claude demands a definitive answer, leaving Rose torn between implicating her fictional guide and facing his further torment. The brown-haired woman, Shauna, begins to walk away as Rose utters her name with a sense of dread. Claude looks at Rose with a puzzled expression, clearly confused by her sudden recognition of the mysterious woman. Shauna turns her head and sharply tells Claude to speak with her directly instead of questioning the low-ranking staff member. Rose gasps in surprise, realizing Shauna is far more intimidating and assertive than she had imagined. Claude, still seated, gives a simple, cold response, agreeing to follow Shauna's lead for now. Claude stands beside Shauna, questioning if she is truly the one who performed the mysterious guiding. Shauna coyly informs Claude that he will have to put in significant effort if he expects to get the answers he wants. Claude remains silent while Shauna flashes a confident smile, relishing the upper hand she now has over him. Rose trembles with anxiety, fearing she has inadvertently involved a truly terrifying and powerful figure. Later at a cafe, Rose lets out a deep sigh and stirs her drink, looking exhausted from a recent ordeal. Rose continues to stir her drink melancholically, unable to shake off the lingering stress. Across the room, her failed plan was playing out. Claude and Shauna sat in a quiet, formal, and chilly atmosphere. Rose recalled their recent trips to the park, amusement park, and beach, frustrated that they always had cafe dates. Rose watched from a distance, lamenting that they were constantly being spotted on dates. Shauna, with a scornful laugh, prepared to share a detail from her conversation with Claude. Claude calmly sipped the drink in his cup, while Shauna mentioned that he seemed to communicate well with her. Rose felt a pang of jealousy wondering why this cold man treated Shauna so much better than he treated her. Memories of Claude's aggressive actions and cold threats resurfaced, highlighting the stark contrast in how he treated Rose. Rose complained about the unfairness of it all, suspecting Claude's mysophobia was easily cured when faced with a pretty face. Rose suddenly gasped as she realized someone had been standing behind her the whole time. Rose recognized the three handsome men, Daniel Rivendell, Wilhelm, and Rivner, who had been her favorite characters in the story. She looked at them in confusion, questioning why these high-ranking individuals would work as Claude's ordinary entourage. Rose cleared her throat and politely asked the three espers if she could inquire about their current duties. Daniel smiled brightly, explaining that Claude's handsome appearance was enough for any man to admit he was cool. Wilhelm added that being able to fight alongside a living legend like Claude instilled a sense of awe deep within them. Rivner concluded that Claude's amazing abilities as an S-class Esper made him someone truly worthy of their respect. As the truth of their motives became clear, Rose stared at them blankly. To her utter disbelief, she realized these powerful men were actually just avid fans of Lord Claude. Rose wore a skeptical expression, wondering how men could see a cold and heartless person as their life's dream role model. The pink-haired girl watched in amazement as the silver-haired man explained that they followed Claude purely out of admiration. Daniel Rivendell looked at Rose with a gentle and concerned expression, asking if her work was too tiring. Rose's eyes sparkled with excitement when Daniel offered to buy her snacks using the facility's event budget. Casting her worries aside, Rose eagerly wanted cake, admitting she had been jealous watching others eat all day. Daniel flashed a brilliant and charming smile, inviting Rose to follow him to pick her favorite flavor. Rose's eyes widened at the sight of a magnificent tower of sandwiches, macarons, and a delicious strawberry cake. Rose took a large bite of the cake, closing her eyes blissfully as the sweet flavor melted. Daniel chuckled at her reaction, asking if it was really that good, while Rose enthusiastically affirmed her delight. With a warm smile, Rose held up a forkful of cake, suggesting everyone else try some too. The sudden attack of affection made the three men blush and their hearts race, stunned by Rose's unexpected sweet gesture. Daniel shyly accepted the bite, and the group finally enjoyed a peaceful moment at the table. Rose was enjoying a pleasant time at her table, unaware of the growing tension in the nearby gathering. Claude maintained a stern and watchful gaze, his red eyes fixed on the pink-haired staff member across the room. Shauna smiled brightly as she spoke to Claude, though her attempts at conversation were met only with his cold disregard. Claude complained about the noise in the cafe, his attention completely diverted by Rose, who was eating with Daniel. Rose looked up in surprise, her blue eyes wide, as she realized Claude was suddenly speaking directly to her. Ignoring his companion, Claude coldly ordered Rose to get him some napkins, taking it for granted that she, as a low-ranking staff member, would obey. Rose was stunned by his rude behavior, but Claude sternly warned her not to make him repeat the order. Rose was furious, wondering why this cold man treated everyone else normally, but acted like a tyrant only toward her. She swallowed her frustration and prepared to fulfill his request, her expression stiffening as she realized there was no escape. Claude continued to torment her, also demanding water, treating the weary Rose as his personal servant in public. Rose screamed internally in anger as she struggled to maintain her composure under Claude's relentless and trivial demands. With a sharp clatter, Rose forcefully placed a mug and spoon in front of the picky, dark-haired man. She leaned over the table with a furious expression, announcing that she was leaving immediately. To get away from him, Rose stormed off, while Claude sat in his chair, watching her with a silent, scrutinizing expression. Turning back to his original companion, Claude nonchalantly asked about the conversation he had completely ignored earlier. Shauna tried to hide her frustration with a blush, commenting on the quality of the cake to break the silence. Rose, engrossed in her snacks, noted that the combination of strawberries and cream on the cake was excellent. Rose friendly suggested everyone try the cake, and Claude surprisingly accepted, murmuring a quiet thank you. This was followed by a sudden, sharp movement as Shauna shot to her feet, her patience clearly exhausted by Claude's inattentiveness. Shauna questioned Claude's true intentions, asking if he had really come to the cafe today to be with her. The atmosphere grew incredibly heavy as Shauna stared down at the seated Claude, her disappointment and anger finally erupting. Claude gave a cold and blunt response, telling Shauna to just say what was on her mind without hesitation. Deciding the conversation was over, Shauna turned and stormed out of the cafe. Rose watched Shauna's dramatic exit in confusion, wondering why the apparent date had ended so abruptly and unpleasantly. Her confusion turned to sudden alarm when Shauna stopped by her table on her way to the exit. Shauna shot a sharp and terrifyingly silent glare, making the startled Rose feel the atmosphere turn cold and dangerous. The narration notes that Shauna's dramatic exit that day was only the beginning of bigger trouble for Rose. Suddenly, the sharp sound of high heels startled Rose, heralding the arrival of a familiar and now very unwelcome person. To Rose's utter dread, Shauna began visiting her workplace daily, venting her endless frustrations and trivial complaints. Shauna loomed over Rose's desk, listing various items about tripping hazards and poor soundproofing, demanding immediate action. Rose scratched her head awkwardly, explaining that she couldn't fix complex facility issues on such short notice. In a comical scene, an enraged Shauna screamed at a terrified Rose that the request had been made a long time ago. A kind male senior intervened, offering to handle Shauna's complaints himself to help the overwhelmed Rose Valentine. With a heavy thud, Shauna rejected the offer, explicitly demanding that only staff member Rose Valentine handle her requests. The senior quickly retreated with a nervous laugh, leaving a sweating Rose to face Shauna's wrath alone. Rose sat dejectedly at her desk, wondering if the sin of eating cake that day was really worth this harassment. Later that day, on her way home, Rose lamented her situation, feeling as if her weekend had become public property for others. In a comical vision, chibi versions of Claude and Shauna tormented a crying Rose with small, sharp devil forks. Feeling frustrated and exhausted, Rose considered whether she should report both of them to the center's administration for harassment. A terrifying vision of Claude appeared, his dark powers surging. As he mockingly asked if she really dared to report him, Rose shook off the dreadful thought, deciding that immediate survival was far more important than risking a formal report. Forced to join them again, Rose was terrified of being with the cold S-Class and the aggressive Shauna. Claude told Rose to stay close in the crowded festival, looking back with an intense gaze to make sure she was keeping up. Rose let out a weary breath, feeling the weight of the day's stress as she followed behind the two high-ranking individuals. Looking around the busy plaza, Rose checked behind her with a sense of unease as the crowd milled around them. Rose politely asked if Claude's usual entourage would be coming today. She missed the more amiable presence of the other handsome espers. Claude shot a sharp, icy glare, making Rose immediately regret asking about the absence of his loyal fan club. Claude announced in a cold and unquestionable tone that the entourage would no longer be joining them from now on. Rose flinched in shock, afraid she had asked the wrong question and inadvertently triggered another wave of Claude's silent fury. Realizing she was truly going to be alone with her tormentors, Rose remembered the kindness from Log 1 and worried for herself. Shauna tried to take Claude's arm to lead the way, clearly attempting to initiate physical contact. Claude coldly rejected the gesture, telling Shauna to keep her distance, while a startled Rose watched from behind. Rose wondered what the point of their dates was if Claude maintained his strict no-touch rule, even with Shauna. Recalling his past hostility towards her and Oscar, Rose felt a strange sense of relief that Claude was making an effort. The group moved with Rose through the festival grounds. Exhaustion hit Rose, and her stomach rumbled loudly as she admitted she was starving after so much walking. A gloved hand suddenly offered Rose a steaming skewer of meat and vegetables, providing a much-needed snack. Stunned, Rose pointed at herself, asking if the cold man was really giving the delicious food to her. Claude's gaze remained steady as he bluntly asked if she didn't want the food he had just bought. With a brilliant smile, Rose eagerly accepted the skewer, thanking him and preparing to enjoy the treat. As Rose reached out to take the food from Claude's hand, Shauna watched the scene with a cold and resentful glare. Feeling full and satisfied, a sleepy Rose patted her stomach, even though the long day was far from over. The festival continued, with an array of street food from grilled skewers to takoyaki drizzled with savory sweet sauce. After sampling dumplings and waffles, Rose concluded that everything she had eaten today was absolutely delicious. Despite the food and fun, Rose felt a lingering sense of unease as she reflected on the day's events. Rose's legs ached from walking, and she sighed wearily just as the announcement for the fireworks show began. With a sudden heavy thud, Rose lost her balance and stumbled in the dense crowd. Moving with surprising speed, Claude caught Rose in his arms, pulling her close to prevent her from falling. Brilliant fireworks exploded in the night sky, illuminating the pair caught in an unexpectedly intimate embrace. The dark-haired man looked down at her and whispered something softly as the festival lights flickered around them. Claude adjusted his collar, his expression unreadable as he remained in close proximity to the startled, pink-haired girl. Rose stared at him with wide eyes and a flushed face, her heart racing from the sudden and intense physical contact. Realizing their current position, Rose felt incredibly awkward, struggling to process the intimacy of the moment. Shauna made another attempt to approach Claude, desperation written on her face as she tried to reclaim his attention. With a sharp and dismissive motion, Claude pulled his arm back, once again refusing to let Shauna touch him. Rose clutched her chest, her breathing heavy, trying to calm her racing heart after the close contact. As Claude prepared to leave, Rose called out to him, her voice filled with confusion and residual surprise. Rose asked where Shauna had gone, accusing Claude of abandoning his date to come to her instead. Claude nonchalantly looked away, claiming he didn't know where Shauna went and assuming she had left on her own. Rose pouted in frustration, lamenting that her precious weekend had been wasted on such a chaotic day. Claude tilted his head, listening with a puzzled expression to Rose's quiet complaints about the situation. The atmosphere shifted as Claude moved closer to Rose, his intense gaze making her yelp. Panicked by their proximity, Rose quickly stammered that it was nothing important to evade his sharp stare. A sudden realization stopped Rose in her tracks, as she recalled the strange feeling of a guiding connection. As the two made eye contact, their hearts raced, and a visual effect of a heartbeat highlighted their shared tension. Claude continued to loom over Rose, his presence overwhelming as the world around them seemed to fade. Back at the office, an exhausted Rose drank her coffee, still reeling from the sudden and unexpected guiding incident. She remembered that after the guiding, Claude had stared at her for a long time before turning to leave. Rose recalled being pulled into Claude's arms as he announced it was time for them to go back. Claude's rare and subtle smile lingered in Rose's mind from when she had wished him a safe trip back. Rose sat at her desk, completely zoned out, her thoughts still trapped in the memories of the festival. A sudden shout from a colleague startled Rose, making her jump out of her seat with a yelp. Rose stared in disbelief as she was told she was being immediately transferred to the Esper support division. Carrying a heavy box, Rose walked through the hallway towards her new post, feeling the stress of the change. Rose complained about the difficulty of the job and the sudden transfer to a new wing. A tall figure appeared, and Rose greeted Lord Claude with shocked and nervous hesitation. Clutching the heavy box, Rose politely asked if the room she had arrived at was his office. Claude jerked his head to the side, coldly ordering Rose to enter his private workspace. Rose was stunned by the grand and luxurious office, her doe-like eyes sparkling at the exquisite interior design. Rose sat down, realizing she would be working much more closely with Claude than she had anticipated. Rose asked Claude if she was now officially his exclusive staff member on this new assignment. Holding the box, Rose wondered who would be in charge of her handover, while Claude sat silently nearby. Visions of delicious pie and strawberry cake filled Rose's mind as she craved something sweet after a meal. A satisfied chibi, Rose patted her round belly. At her desk, Rose leaned back comfortably, hoping this peace and quiet as Claude's secretary would last forever. With a sudden yelp, Rose jolted awake, realizing she had been caught dozing off. Claude looked back at her with a cold and unreadable expression, sending a chill down Rose's spine. Panicked and sweating, Rose worried that Claude would scold her for sleeping on the job. Claude turned briefly and ordered her to put on her coat and follow him. Rose followed behind him, feeling too guilty about eating all day to refuse his sudden late-night demand. The pair arrived at a magnificent high-end restaurant, glittering in the warm glow of the setting sun. Rose was stunned by the elegance, wondering why Claude had booked such a luxurious place. She assumed the gorgeous venue was for another formal date with the aggressive Shauna. As they entered the lavish interior, Rose wondered just how amazing the food would taste. Claude sat at a pristine table with sharp, decisive movements. He waited silently, his gaze fixed on the empty chair. With a soft sound, Claude looked up with a frown, asking the standing Rose why she wasn't sitting down. The startled Rose explained that she thought the seat was reserved for his usual date, Miss Shauna. With a sharp, impatient tap, Claude ordered Rose to sit directly across from him. Stunned, Rose realized she was about to have a private meal with the intimidating S-Class. She asked if he really wanted her to sit there, her face full of confusion. Claude's shadow loomed over her as he bluntly asked if she was refusing, scaring Rose into sitting down immediately. Looking at the menu, Rose's eyes sparkled with excitement at the sight of the delicious, high-class food. The waiter stood by as Rose struggled to decide among the many mouth-watering options. Claude arrogantly snapped the menu shut and ordered the waiter to bring everything listed on it. Rose was overwhelmed with joy, moved that he had fulfilled a dream she had only dared to imagine. An amazing feast was delivered, laden with poultry, seafood, and a tower of colorful macarons. Rose ate happily, quietly thanking the mastermind for his unexpected kindness and generosity. Curiosity getting the better of her, Rose asked why this special dinner wasn't for Shauna. Claude took an elegant bite, calmly telling Rose to ask whatever she wanted. Rose nervously inquired why he had chosen not to dine with Miss Shauna tonight. Claude announced in an utterly cold tone that Shauna meant absolutely nothing to him anymore. He stared at his food, stating firmly that Shauna was definitely not his destined guide. Rose looked at him with wide, curious eyes, wondering how he could possibly know something like that. Claude maintained his intense gaze, simply stating that his intuition had told him the truth. Fear gripped Rose as she wondered if he had realized she was the one who had been guiding him all along. Claude looked away, lamenting his failure to find his guide before the start of a dangerous upcoming operation. Deeply concerned, Rose asked for details about the mysterious and sudden mission and its destination. Claude explained that he had to go alone to stop an erupting portal, knowing he lacked the support of guide. A dark vision showed Claude's power, surging dangerously as he admitted that returning safely would be very difficult. A heavy silence fell over the scene as Rose froze in place, digesting the life-threatening news he had just shared. Claude looked down and explained that he had chosen a remote location to minimize the destruction his rampage would cause. The narration warns that an Esper's death from a power surge releases a catastrophic explosion of energy. A blinding and violent flash of light erupted in the darkness. It was described as the tragic death of a star. Claude stood alone in the void, resigned to a fate that could end in destruction. Rose stared at the table, her appetite gone, wondering if this was his last supper. Claude called the meal a final gift to compensate for the torment he had caused her in the past. A sharp pang of sadness hit Rose as she watched him with a heavy, worried heart. Later, Rose carried a bag of leftovers, her hands trembling from the news he had revealed. Alone in her room, Rose reflected on the original game's tragic ending and Claude's lonely, fated path. Rose stared down with a heavy heart, wondering if it was really right to let Claude die like this. She clenched her hands, afraid of the potential intimacy that would come if Claude demanded an imprinting after being guided. In a moment of desperation, a chibi Rose peeked into her roommate's room, seeking Irene's advice. Irene, still huddled under the covers, coolly stated that she was sleeping, while Rose worried about being ignored. Rose knelt by the bed, pleading with the rational Irene to help her judge the difficult situation. A persistent chibi, Rose repeatedly begged for assistance, while the blonde Irene showed clear annoyance. Irene finally relented, sighing for Rose to speak, which elicited the girl's enthusiastic gratitude. Rose began her story, framing it as a problem about a friend, which Irene found predictable. Rose recalled the shift in her perception of the dark-haired man, from fear to dislike, and then to seeing him as a kind person. She continued the story about the friend who wanted to help a man with unclear motives. Irene bluntly asked if Rose's resolve was wavering, startling the pink-haired girl into jumping. Irene sat up in bed, pointing out that Claude's recent attention towards Rose in public had not gone unnoticed. Irene sternly poked Rose Valentine on the nose, warning the naive girl to be grounded and realistic about the situation. Rose hung her head as Irene questioned whether a powerful ruler could truly understand care or consideration. The blonde woman crossed her arms, declaring that a man like Claude was too much for Rose to handle. Irene stood firmly in the room, advising Rose to stop chasing illusory dreams that would only bring trouble. Back in the office, Rose was startled by the sound of an arrival and invited them in. A brown-haired man in glasses and a lab coat, Senior Azir, entered the room with a friendly wave. A lavish spread of macarons and cake was on the table, and Rose directed her senior's attention to the sweets. Senior Azir marveled at the food, and Rose explained they were snacks Claude had refused to eat earlier that day. Senior Azir ate happily, remarking that he was glad the dark-haired man seemed to be holding up. The two laughed together, and Senior Azir asked Rose to keep his rude comment about Claude a secret, which she readily agreed to. The atmosphere shifted when Rose admitted she had a serious problem, piquing the spectacled senior's curiosity. A past guiding scene flashed in Rose's mind, her hand on Claude's head, shimmering energy flowing. Senior Azir revealed he had already suspected her secret and had chosen to remain silent to protect her interests. Rose realized the danger of her secret, knowing she would be arrested if her guiding ability was exposed. A terrified Chibi, Rose imagined herself locked in a dark cage under Claude's stern gaze. Senior Azir leaned in, asking Rose to reveal the true core issue troubling her heart. Rose admitted that she had been spending a significant amount of time with the intimidating Claude recently. A sudden blush spread across Rose's face as she struggled to articulate the emotions she was developing. A chibi Senior Azir smiled knowingly, playfully asking if she was actually starting to like Claude. Rose quickly changed the subject, asking if there was a way to help Claude before his mission. A vision of a bloody and defeated Claude haunted her thoughts, intensifying her urgent need to intervene. Rose asked if she could secretly guide him, her eyes filled with the determination to save him from his fate. Senior Azir looked at her with a gentle expression and agreed to help her formulate a plan. Claude reflected on his painful life, lamenting how exhausting it was to rely on inhibitors just to survive the day. S-Class Esper Claude Dunhart recalled being a man blessed by the gods, yet burdened by a curse. Born into a prominent Esper family, a young Claude had lived a life completely devoid of failure. Everything changed when his powers awakened, and he realized a terrible curse had taken effect. He explained his rare condition. Contact with a guide caused extreme physical pain instead of providing relief. Scientists and his father watched through glass as they had tried to force him to accept guiding support. That failed attempt left Claude with severe trauma, making him despise even the simplest physical contact. He described the feeling of spiraling down into sensory overload in a world of darkness. In a moment of absolute despair as he was consumed by chaos, Claude clawed at the ground, preferring death to continued suffering. He panted, drenched in sweat, wondering how much longer he could endure in such a miserable state. Rose prepared for action, clutching a dark gem and telling herself to approach him slowly and gently. The scene focuses on Claude's face as he falls into a deep sleep with his eyes closed as the plan begins. Remembering the instructions given by Senior Azir, Rose cautiously peeked from the doorway to find her target. Azir had explained that a large dose of inhibitors would create the perfect opportunity for Rose to sneak in. Entering the room, Rose hoped to alleviate her guilt by guiding him while her senior provided cover. Claude slept peacefully as Rose prepared to secretly guide him to ease his suffering. Rose reached out and cautiously touched Claude's hand, beginning her unauthorized guiding attempt. Panic set in as Rose realized she completely lacked practical knowledge of the guiding process. A chibi Rose attempted a literal energy shock, but the clumsy effort immediately ended in failure. She closed her eyes and desperately prayed for a miracle, only to be met with another disappointing failure. Taking a step closer, she tried a gentler approach, reaching out to touch the dark-haired man's forehead. Rose grabbed her head as frustration erupted, lamenting that she had no idea how to guide him. Looking down at the sleeping Claude, Rose stood in solemn silence, overwhelmed by the frustration of her inability to help. Rose leaned in closer, her eyes searching Claude's face, trying to find a solution. She believed she had found the answer, but a lingering doubt told her it was still not perfect. A determined chibi, Rose considered repeatedly trying her guiding method until she finally achieved the desired effect. A softly glowing kiss served as a final, desperate attempt to transfer her guiding energy to him. Rose's eyes widened as she froze in shock, processing the intimacy of her own sudden, bold action. Her hand was pinned down, and she let out a muffled, surprised sound of pain. Claude had suddenly woken up, grabbing Rose by the chin and catching her completely off guard with his intense gaze. Under a watchful gaze, Eileen stood with her arms crossed sternly, while Rose tried to hide behind the blonde woman's shadow. Claude inwardly reflected on the figure of the pink-haired woman, her image lingering persistently in his mind. Rose jumped in surprise, her attention drawn to an unexpected situation happening out of sight. Claude flipped through Rose Valentine's official civilian file, confirming her status as an ordinary citizen. Claude clutched his head, struggling with a growing obsession and a deep-seated desire to touch her. Rose lay alone in bed, looking up with a heavy heart as she contemplated their complicated situation. Claude recalled a past meeting, driven by a strange and intense emotion he had never experienced before. He remembered pulling her into a tight embrace and watching over her with a vigilant and protective gaze. Claude realized that merely observing Rose's lively demeanor was not enough to uncover the truth about her. Oscar listened as a memory of a past dangerous encounter with Claude was recounted. Oscar felt a surge of panic, suspecting that Claude's past actions might have stemmed from genuine romantic feelings. Claude lost his patience, grabbing a panicked Azir by his clothes and lifting him off the ground, the scientist screaming as he desperately tried to escape Claude's wrath. Azir shifted the blame entirely onto Rose, claiming she was the true culprit. Oscar watched the chaotic and bizarre scene unfold before him with a look of utter confusion. Claude turned his sharp gaze toward the newcomer, acknowledging Oscar's arrival. After a cold greeting, the two sat down, preparing to discuss a matter of great importance in private. Seeking a new perspective, Claude asked Oscar for relationship advice to better understand Rose's evasive behavior. Oscar suggested a plan to alleviate her fears, warning Claude that the proposed method would be unpleasant. Claude expressed his absolute resolve, willing to endure any cost as long as it meant keeping Rose by his side. An elaborate plan to deceive Rose began, using Shauna as a decoy to lower the girl's guard. Claude recalled how he had slowly approached her, using simple gestures like offering food to win her trust. Memories of shared meals and group gatherings flashed by as he continued his carefully orchestrated pursuit of her. Claude stood tall, recalling how he had effortlessly handled various obstacles to clear the path toward his goal. The dark-haired man gazed affectionately into Rose's eyes, his attention completely consumed by the pink-haired girl. Claude discussed a risky plan involving a nauseating drug to stage a surprise attack and manipulate the situation. He firmly rejected any reckless options, determined not to repeat his past failures. Oscar sighed in discouragement, calling Claude hopelessly stubborn and overly cautious when it came to matters of love. Claude accepted the plan, enduring the sensory assault of the potent drug coursing through his body. Rose leaned in close, and Claude inwardly declared his willingness to endure the pain for his guide. Tenderness filled the air as Rose gently stroked Claude's hair, unaware that he was conscious at that moment. Rose was caught in the act, seized by the fear of a harsh reprimand for her secret behavior. Claude looked down at Rose, who was kneeling on the floor, sternly ordering her to take her punishment seriously and stop slacking off. Chibi Rose yelled in frustration, wondering why Claude had to wake up at that exact moment. Rose trembled with nervousness, asking how much longer she had to maintain this uncomfortable position. Claude watched her with a sharp gaze, declaring that she must stay until she fully realized her mistake. A completely clueless Chibi Rose appeared, her mind racing with countless possibilities as she wondered which mistake Claude was referring to. Claude asked Rose why she had hidden the fact that she was the one who had guided him that day. Chibi Rose realized her secret had protected her from being killed by the game's mastermind, but she remained silent. Claude leaned in close, forcefully tilting Rose's chin up and trapping her under his intense and probing gaze. A look of utter shock crossed Rose's face as her heart pounded violently from the close proximity. Claude hinted that Rose was fond of another Esper, causing an uncontrollable deep crimson blush to spread across her cheeks. Rose narrowed her eyes, wondering if Claude was actually jealous and sensing a strange change in him. Claude placed his hands on Rose's shoulders, a sudden and firm gesture that made her feel trapped. Chibi Rose imagined Claude strangling her, deepening her desperation to escape his potentially fatal attention. A trembling Rose confessed her lack of knowledge about guiding, feeling helpless due to her inability to control her powers. Claude dismissed her concerns, while Chibi Rose let out a confused huh. At his calm reaction, Claude clasped his gloved hands, declaring that they would simply have to keep trying until her guiding finally worked. Rose felt complete disbelief, her heart racing as she demanded he explain that shocking proposal. Claude explained the first step of his plan as a dark and oppressive aura began to loom over Rose. Claude smiled with a mysterious energy, preparing to reveal the next stage of their partnership. Rose's eyes widened in sheer terror as she understood the true meaning of Claude's imprinting proposal. A silhouette depicted the permanent bond that imprinting would create. This bond granted the Esper and Guide exclusive rights to one another. Chibi Rose panicked, while a Claude with demon wings prepared to stamp the imprinting registration form. Rose's hands trembled as she realized that imprinting required spending a night together, a reality she could not face. A horrified Rose watched as Claude unbuttoned his coat, refusing to hand over her entire life so carelessly. Claude suggested they live together, causing Rose to blush furiously and stammer in confusion. A smug and satisfied smile appeared on Claude's face as he watched Rose's flustered and shy reaction. Walking across the grass, Rose couldn't help but let out a gasp of wonder, thinking they might be going to his house. Her eyes sparkled with newfound hope as she realized there were certain benefits to living with a rich man. Arriving at a modern estate, Rose was stunned by the sheer luxury of Claude's massive private residence. Chibi Rose cheered at the prospect of living together in such a high-class house. As a hand reached for the doorknob, Rose was still wondering if the interior would be just as modern and chic. Stepping inside, Rose froze in place, her face turning pale at the sight before her. The house was cold and empty, making Rose wonder if anyone actually lived in such a hollow space. Claude offered to furnish the place for her, which delighted Rose as she admitted her passion for interior design. Rose lay on an expensive bed, basking in the comfort of what she called her heaven on earth. Rose contrasted Claude's self-sufficient approach to cleaning with her former roommate Eileen's constant nagging about chores. Claude forbade her from entering his office, insisting she work remotely from a designated seat in his home. Surrounded by flowers, Rose beamed with joy at having achieved her dream of a lazy and comfortable life. The sound of an approaching presence interrupted her peace, signaling that dinner was ready. A lavish feast was set before Rose, which she eagerly prepared to enjoy. Rose closed her eyes in pure bliss, happily chewing and savoring every delicious bite Claude provided. Claude watched her with a look of satisfaction, pleased that she was enjoying the meal he had prepared. Rose's eyes twinkled with curiosity as she wondered why Claude was content to just watch her eat without joining in. Claude claimed with a smile that he wasn't hungry, while Rose watched him with growing suspicion. Rose stared at a piece of meat on her fork, suspecting Claude of having a dark, ulterior motive. Rose suddenly accused Claude of trying to fatten her up like a pig to make her ugly. Claude looked back with an expression of shock and confusion, completely caught off guard by her absurd logic. Rose imagined Claude rejecting her pig-like self, worried that he was trying to ensure no one else would want her. Claude covered his face to hide his laughter, finding Rose's absurd and wild imagination highly amusing. Claude's expression softened as he laughed openly, his gaze warming as he was genuinely amused by her antics. Chibi Rose remained confused, unable to understand why he kept feeding her if her theory was wrong. Feeling uneasy, Rose pushed away from the table, announcing she was done eating for the day. A beautiful strawberry cake was suddenly presented, its sweet appearance designed to crumble her resolve. Rose's eyes bulged in shock as she recognized it as a famously hard-to-get cake she had always wanted to try. Rose reluctantly accepted the offer, eating happily with a look of contentment. Claude offered a delicious strawberry cake, which Rose devoured after declaring the dessert completely harmless. Claude fed Rose a piece of cake, at which point she thought about how handsome he looked in that moment. Rose wondered why Claude continued to be increasingly nice to her despite her lazy behavior. Watching him from behind, Rose realized she might eventually feel guilty for being so cold to him. A moment of quiet reflection passed between them as they stood side by side in their shared home. Rose asked Claude if her lifestyle was acceptable, expressing concern over her unstable and unreliable guiding abilities. Claude admitted that he hated lazy slackers, causing Rose to feel a sudden pang of intense anxiety. Claude gently caressed Rose's face, reassuring her that their current living arrangement was perfectly fine with him. As Claude held her close, Rose's guiding suddenly activated, showing a spark of success. Claude leaned toward Rose, making the atmosphere tense as she called his name with bated breath. A passionate kiss followed, and Rose realized that physical contact was causing her guiding energy to surge. Claude's fingers lingered gently by Rose's ear, further fueling the growing connection between the Esper and guide. Rose's cheeks flushed a deep red as she felt the overwhelming intensity of Claude's proximity. Overwhelmed by the sensation, Rose realized she had never felt such a massive and potent amount of guiding before. Rose fell silent in shock, her eyes wide as she stared upward, processing the sudden and powerful shift in her abilities. Claude called Rose's name, saying she was interesting as his expression softened with genuine amusement. A lavishly prepared steak dinner was ready, adding to the luxury of Rose's new life. Claude stood confidently, observing the scene with a smug and satisfied expression on his face. Rose clutched her head in frustration, desperately trying to figure out the specific trigger for her elusive guiding ability. While Claude seemed to have understood the secret to their success, Rose remained completely in the dark. Under the guise of practicing guiding, Rose found herself unable to avoid Claude's constant and deliberate physical contact, feeling the warmth of his touch against her skin. Rose admitted to herself that she was slowly starting to enjoy his attention. Troubled by her own emotions, Rose wondered if she was actually growing attached to the man she once feared. Rose reminded herself that despite the sweetness of their cohabitation, Claude was ultimately the dangerous final villain of her story. A fear lingered deep in her mind that his cruel nature could resurface at any moment. Gazing into each other's eyes, Rose considered the possibility that they might actually be able to coexist. Filled with determination, Rose decided to uncover the secret method behind her guiding ability as soon as possible. Rose mentally prepared herself for the task ahead, intending to investigate the mystery of her own powers. After managing to escape a clingy Claude, Rose insisted on some much-needed personal time. Rose gathered a large stack of academic books, hoping one of them contained the answers she sought about guiding. Dressed in a cozy green hoodie, Rose felt optimistic about the upcoming research on her unique condition. Exhaustion quickly set in, and with a thud, Rose collapsed onto the floor amidst a pile of research materials. To her dismay, Rose discovered that there were no records or documents describing a condition similar to hers. Feeling utterly defeated and lost, Rose wondered what her next move should be in this confusing situation. Rose tearfully questioned how Claude could possibly understand her powers when she, the person in question, knew nothing. Her crying was interrupted by a familiar and unexpected voice that suddenly called her name. Rose's eyes widened as she recognized the blonde woman, Irene, standing in the library. Chibi Rose clung to Irene, sobbing desperately and begging the blonde woman to listen to her many troubles. Rose recalled how long she and Claude had been living together as she prepared to explain the situation. Irene reacted to the news with a cool demeanor, leaving a shocked Rose to wonder why she wasn't more surprised. Irene admitted she already had a general idea of the situation, showcasing her keen observation skills. Irene bluntly pointed out that Rose was terrible at keeping secrets, suggesting that Claude had likely known the truth all along. Irene's harsh honesty stung Rose's heart like a dagger. But the blonde woman quickly shifted her focus to the problem. Rose confessed her fear of being Claude's guide. Worried he would discard her once she was no longer useful. Despite Irene's cold attitude, Rose hoped her friend's sharp intellect could provide the guidance she desperately needed. Irene's straightforward response to Rose's predicament drew a loud and startled exclamation from the pink-haired girl. Irene pointed out that Rose's previous complaints had sounded like requests for love advice, questioning her current display of dramatic aversion. Rose frantically argued that everything had changed now that Claude finally knew her true identity as his guide. Panic gripped Rose as she realized their current path could lead to a permanent and terrifying imprinting bond. Irene looked completely stunned, sweat dripping down her face as she imagined an indecent scene involving her friend. Desperate and terrified, Rose reached out to grab the blonde woman who was about to walk away, begging Irene to stay. Glancing at the large clock on the wall, Rose panicked as she realized she had promised Claude she would be back by noon. Walking away dejectedly, a listless chibi, Rose lamented her failure to find any answers about her powers. Rose stopped in her tracks, blinking in surprise as she saw the blonde-haired man, Daniel, standing nearby. Daniel greeted Rose warmly at the estate gate, holding a large white gift box tied with a red ribbon. Rose looked at the high-end cake and had a sudden realization, discovering that Daniel had been the one providing her with snacks. Excited by her friend's presence, Rose invited Daniel inside to share the meal and chat. A loud bang suddenly echoed as a firm hand gripped the doorknob and a low voice called out for Rose. Claude loomed in the doorway. His eyes narrowed in fury as he demanded to know why she had been gone for hours. Rose trembled in fear, her face pale as she realized Claude was genuinely furious about her tardiness. Claude spoke coldly to Daniel, mockingly questioning if he also had time to waste loitering around the estate. A panicked Rose rushed toward Claude to explain the situation, while a startled Daniel stood awkwardly in the background. The atmosphere grew even more tense as Claude questioned whether Rose had already given Daniel an affectionate nickname. Claude issued a stern command for Daniel to leave the cake and get lost, leaving no room for argument. Daniel fled the scene in a panic while Rose yelled after him, terrified of being left alone with Claude. Before she could escape, a firm hand reached out from behind and grabbed the hood of Rose's green sweater. Claude dragged a protesting Rose toward the house, her feet sliding on the ground as she cried out in distress. Rose trembled in fear, wondering if she had been blacklisted and would be permanently forbidden from leaving the house. Claude stood tall, sternly ordering Rose to get inside at once, while continuing to drag her by her hood. A dark and heavy atmosphere settled over the scene, an ominous low-frequency vibration echoing in the air. Rose sat on the sofa with her head bowed submissively, while an intimidating Claude stood before her. In the heavy silence, Rose looked up at him with wide eyes, confused and fearful of his next move. A flashback revealed a mission led by a younger Claude, where older espers disrespected him and ignored his tactical commands. The scene showed a young Claude standing before the tied-up rebels, explaining how he had given them one last, stern warning. The betrayal continued as other espers ambushed him in his bed late at night, just days after the warning. A horrifying scene depicted how Claude had tied up his attackers and thrown them into a mutant creature's nest to be executed. Listening to the brutal story, Rose's face was etched with fear, her mouth agape in shock. Narrative text explained that after such a public and violent example, no one ever dared to defy Claude again. Claude sneered down at her, mentioning that it had been a long time since anyone had dared to defy him. Claude leaned closer with an intense and predatory gaze, making Rose feel even more vulnerable and trapped. Rose's mind raced as she feared her only remaining options were to be permanently imprinted or meet a tragic end. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the house as a red system notification announced that a code black had been issued. Claude's face became extremely serious, his eyes flashing as he cursed the sudden and dangerous escalation of the situation. A flicker of confusion crossed Rose's face as she asked what exactly a code black meant. Dark energy swirled around a portal from which dragon-like mutant creatures emerged, representing a national-level disaster threat. Images of burning buildings flashed by, recalling the tragic history of the last code black 14 years ago. A group of men in dark suits stood together, representing the forces that had to respond to such extreme emergencies. The continuous sound of the alarm echoed, its shrill tone emphasizing the imminent danger facing the entire capital. Claude prepared for battle, telling Rose that her current situation was nothing compared to the chaos unfolding outside. As Claude walked toward the door, Rose watched him leave, feeling a surprising and deep sense of concern. Claude paused for a brief second, placing a gloved hand on Rose's shoulder and looking back at her one last time. Claude issued a final threat for her to stay in the house, but Rose retorted by calling him a monster to his face. Left alone in the silent, large house, Rose hugged herself, feeling a strange emptiness after Claude's departure. Guilt pricked at her heart as she regretted not wishing him luck, worried she might never see him again. Rose shook her head to clear her thoughts, telling herself to focus on her own survival and comfort. Her attention was drawn to the flashing intercom screen, wondering who would be visiting during a crisis. A brown-haired man with glasses and a lab coat appeared on the monitor, whom Rose recognized as Azir. Rose opened the door, looking at her senior colleague in shock and asking why he had come to the house. The brown-haired man in the lab coat, Azir, urgently told Rose to escape while Claude was away. Rose was confused, questioning the sudden need to escape during a dangerous code black alert. Azir blinked, revealing that he had faked the emergency alert just to lure Claude out of the house. Rose was horrified by Azir's reckless actions, realizing why the surrounding area had felt so unsettlingly calm. Azir defended his risky plan, claiming it was the only way to get that monster out of the house. Still skeptical, Rose questioned why he would resort to such extreme measures for this prank. Azir looked back at Rose, asking for her trust as he prepared to lead her away. Azir noticed Rose's puffy face and assumed Claude had been physically abusing her, creating a deep misunderstanding. Rose tried to deflect the concern, privately worrying that her lazy habits and salty snacks were showing. Azir sympathized with Rose internally, convinced she was making up excuses to cover for Claude's cruelty. A panicked Rose desperately tried to clear up the misunderstanding as they continued their urgent escape. Azir clutched his head in anguish, proclaiming that he too was a victim of Claude's terror. Azir continued his emotional outburst, reminding Rose that his upcoming wedding was ruined because of that man. A memory showed his dark-haired fiancée calling off the wedding after discovering he had hidden his hair loss. Azir warned Rose that Claude was manipulating her, just as he manipulated everyone around him. Rose expressed doubt, pointing out that while Claude threatened her, she couldn't imagine him actually deceiving her. Azir revealed a deeper conspiracy by Claude, showing a flashback of Claude pinning a colleague named Oscar against a wall. Rose was stunned as Azir explained that Claude and Oscar had teamed up to make her lower her guard. Azir confessed that he had been forced to leak her information after Claude threatened him with dark magic. Azir urged Rose to escape with him immediately to flee the dangerous web Claude had woven. Doubt poisoned Rose's heart as she wondered if Claude's gentle smiles had all been an act. She recalled Claude's tender gaze and soft expressions, now suspecting they were entirely fake. A peaceful memory of sharing dessert made Rose question if their entire life together had been built on a lie. Realization washed over her as Rose looked up, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Azir took Rose's hand, pleading with her to trust him and follow. A close-up showed Azir's sincere expression behind his glasses as he awaited her final answer. Azir reinforced his plea, telling Rose to just follow him to safety and freedom. Azir looked directly at her, his gaze firm and hopeful as he waited for her choice. Resentment built up in Rose's heart as she decided she would no longer obey the man who had bullied and deceived her. Rose firmly took Azir's hand, deciding to trust her senior colleague and move forward. The scene switched to an exterior shot of the city as the sun set over the buildings. During a guide call, Azir and Rose stood before an official at the Guide Rights Protection Committee office, the air thick with tension. Azir announced loudly to the room that Rose was an unregistered guide being abused by the center. The woman at the desk reacted helplessly, admitting that the organization was practically powerless. Azir roared that everyone was afraid of Claude, questioning why they all worshipped such a dangerous figure. A group of espers in dark uniforms, drawn by the loud shouting in the hallway, gathered at the doorway. Azir's anger erupted while Rose watched the situation escalate into a public spectacle. Noticing the gathering crowd, a worried Rose pleaded with Azir to calm down and lower his voice. Azir's eyes lit up as he realized the crowd provided the perfect opportunity to make the scandal public. Azir shouted to everyone present, accusing Claude Dunhart of exploiting an unregistered guide for his own benefit. He claimed Claude had kidnapped and monopolized her, while a horrified Rose begged him to stop the public display. The Espers began to murmur among themselves, acknowledging rumors that Claude had a hidden guide locked away somewhere. One man noted that Claude had been looking refreshed lately, while other Espers struggled to get any guiding. The assembled Espers began to protest, demanding that the center immediately address this perceived discrimination. Rose stood before the crowd of curious Espers who were staring and whispering, feeling overwhelmed and humiliated. The humiliation intensified as Rose was treated like a spectacle and forced to undergo a guiding test. Rose tried to console herself, hoping that becoming an official guide would put a definitive end to Claude's threat. A researcher in a lab coat instructed Rose to place her hand on a glowing purple orb. The purple orb radiated a magical glow, ready to measure Rose's unique guiding potential. The compatibility results appeared on a floating panel, showing a high result of 51 for a certain Esper. Rose stared at the purple orb, preparing for the test that would determine her fate as a guide. Sitting beside Azir, Rose hoped this test would resolve her complicated situation with Claude for good. Rose remembered Claude's intense physical proximity, wondering if her choice to run away had really been the right one. Though startled but firm, Rose confirmed she was ready to begin the official guide compatibility test. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the glowing purple orb. The surrounding crowd of Espers murmured in anticipation for the first time, wondering if Rose truly possessed the power of a guide. A heavy silence fell over the scene as the crowd parted, reacting in shock to a commanding order. "Make way." Claude stood tall in his dark uniform, his crimson eyes cold, making a dramatic and unexpected appearance. Rose felt a jolt of extreme shock, realizing that Claude had found her much faster than she had ever anticipated. Claude strode toward Rose with an imposing aura, calling her name as everyone else watched in silence. Azir bravely stepped in front of Rose, ordering Claude to back off and stop exploiting his senior colleague. As a burst of purple energy erupted with Claude tossing Azir aside, Rose watched in horror as her lifeline vanished. Trembling on the stool, Rose felt utterly hopeless, wondering how she would survive this confrontation. Rose's eyes widened in sudden realization as she faced the man she had desperately tried to escape. To everyone's shock, the imposing Claude knelt on one knee before Rose, in a surprising show of humility. Claude looked up at her, his gaze steady, his sudden change in behavior leaving Rose deeply confused and wary. Claude questioned Rose about her true feelings, asking if she had genuinely been worried about him during the fake emergency. Rose looked down at the floor, realizing Claude had deduced the entire alarm was a ruse. A pang of guilt hit her, knowing he had rushed home in a panic just for her. The crowd began to whisper, recognizing Rose's name and gossiping that she was Claude's long hidden guide. Claude stared at her intently, asking if she had truly intended to leave him of her own free will. Rose remained silent, her heart filled with conflict as she processed Claude's sincere tone and vulnerable posture. Claude's expression softened for a moment, hinting at a depth of emotion Rose had never seen. Rose grappled with Azir's accusations, wondering if Claude had truly orchestrated everything to trap her. In front of the entire audience, Claude sincerely apologized for his past cruelty and the lies he had told her. Rose was stunned, watching as the nation's most feared Esper bowed his head before her, pleading for another chance. Claude confessed that his desperation for a guide had led him to make terrible mistakes and acknowledged the pain he had caused. Claude made one final request. If her test results showed the highest match rate with him, she must return to his side. The onlooking Espers were dumbfounded, unable to believe the arrogant Claude Dunhart would humble himself so publicly. Rose scrutinized Claude's earnest face, wondering if his words now were genuine. As Rose contemplated her next move at this critical juncture, her reflection rippled in the purple sphere. Claude remained silent, his gaze unwavering, awaiting Rose's final decision. Rose decided to proceed with the test, telling herself she had to see the results to find a way forward. Rose touched the sphere, desperately hoping she was not the perfect match for the man kneeling before her. Azir watched in confusion as the sphere showed no reaction, announcing that no guiding waves had appeared. Rose panicked, suddenly remembering that her unique guiding ability could not be activated by simple physical contact alone. The crowd let out jeers, believing her claims were a lie, while Claude watched her with a subtle, knowing smile. Rose stood up in frustration, insisting that her unique trait was the reason for the failed test result. The other espers averted their gazes, their doubtful expressions showing they no longer believed in her abilities. Humiliation burned on her cheeks as Rose faced the collective doubt of the entire testing room. To prove herself, Rose offered to perform a guiding immediately to demonstrate her true potential. Chibi espers whispered about her identity, still unsure if she was truly Claude's fated guide. Rose felt isolated and betrayed, realizing the other espers were too afraid of Claude to help her. To her surprise, Claude smiled warmly and began to remove his white gloves to assist her. Rose was shocked by the gesture, knowing his gloves were an essential part of his combat uniform. She abruptly realized that she still didn't fully understand the specific conditions required to trigger her guiding. As Claude took her hand, Rose looked at him in confusion, wondering what he planned to do next. Claude pulled her hand toward his face, his intense gaze focused entirely on her. As the atmosphere shifted, Rose looked back at him, her senses overwhelmed and her face flushing from the physical proximity and Claude's intense emotions. In an awkward panic, Rose wondered if Claude had truly gone mad in front of everyone. The purple sphere glowed intensely, Rose's touch having successfully triggered a powerful and undeniable guiding reaction. A shy, chibi Rose hoped this display of power would be enough to satisfy the demanding crowd around them. Looking at Claude, Rose felt a heavy weight of guilt for her earlier lies and wondered why he was still helping her. To the sound of rapid keyboard clacking, Azir stared at the monitor, stunned by the astonishing results. Azir announced the shocking news. Rose's match rate, with over half of the espers in the center, exceeded 60. The room erupted in disbelieving murmurs as the other espers struggled to believe such an unprecedented compatibility score. Rose's eyes widened in utter disbelief as she grappled with the reality of her newfound identity, her mind racing. Historically, a 60 match rate signified a fated lifelong partner, a rare occurrence far exceeding the usual average. Realizing she was now a coveted prize, Rose feared every esper would desperately want to claim her for themselves. Rose looked at her own hands, reflecting on her simple desire for freedom and her fear of Claude's control. Azir's expression turned grave as he prepared to reveal an even more shocking detail from the compatibility test. An ornate panel displayed the final bombshell. Claude Dunhart's match rate with Rose was a near-perfect 97. Rose completely held her breath, her face turning beet red as she confirmed the impossible 97 synchronization rate with Claude. Azir confirmed this historic result was a first of its kind, and the entire room fell into a dead silence. Other guides shot her jealous looks, while the male espers saw Rose as the ultimate, most coveted prize. Overwhelmed by the chaotic situation, Rose felt lost and desperately wanted to escape the suffocating public spectacle. Claude's intense gaze remained fixed on Rose as he gently took her hand, exuding an air of possessive calm. Two indignant espers protested loudly, refusing to let even an S-class esper like Claude monopolize such a powerful guide. Amid the frenzied scene, the surrounding men demanded their right to use Rose's guiding, treating her like a resource. Horrified at being treated like an object, Rose felt a wave of relief as Claude sternly defended her dignity against the greedy crowd. Claude looked down at the protesting men, his expression turning cold, ready to settle the matter for good. As Rose gazed into Claude's eyes, her heart suddenly pounded, feeling an unexpected, deep connection. Claude's hand tightened around Rose's, sealing their connection, and a brilliant light began to emanate. Standing in a flower-like aura, the two shared an intense moment of synchronization that left Rose visibly shocked and breathless. As the warmth of the successful guiding flowed through her heart, a gentle, genuine smile finally appeared on Rose's face. Azir abruptly interrupted the intimate moment with a sharp cough, his face pale and his eyes filled with lingering resentment. A sudden sound of footsteps drew everyone's attention as a new figure of authority entered the tense testing room. Azir, looking battered and bloodied, desperately pleaded with Rose for help to finally defeat the powerful Claude Dunhart. Rose, furious at the escalation, realized Azir's reckless scheme had nearly ruined everything, her anger burning like a physical flame. Claude ignored the commotion, calmly stating he would respect Rose's choice despite the pressure from those around them. With rhythmic footsteps, an imposing figure approached, his steps echoing a warning down the silent, crowded hallway. An authoritative voice commanded Claude to let go of Rose, causing the gathered crowd to whisper in fear and recognition. The center's head of security had arrived, his facial scar and blonde hair marking him as a high-ranking powerhouse. Rose trembled, recognizing the security force as the strongest of espers and realizing the gravity of the legal accusation. The head officially charged Claude with kidnapping and illegal confinement, ignoring the esper's cold, unconcerned expression. This was followed by a stern warning, as the head announced the entire matter would be immediately submitted for an emergency trial. In the background, Azir wore a twisted, vengeful smile, reveling in the thought of Claude finally being punished for his actions. Rose felt a sense of betrayal, realizing Azir had manipulated the situation without ever asking for her consent. Claude pulled Rose closer to him, his protective stance a silent challenge to the authority figure before him. Claude looked the head directly in the eye, questioning the legal basis for the trial with a frighteningly calm confidence. Claude turned the tables, demanding the arrest of the man who issued a false high-priority alert at his residence. As the truth about the black-level false alarm spread, the crowd gasped, instantly casting doubt on Azir's credibility. Rose looked up at Claude in confusion, wondering what his next move would be in this high-stakes legal game. As Claude prepared to make his move, a sudden resonance of energy rang out, his power rippling through the stagnant air. The head of security held out a hand in warning, ordering Claude to stay put until the matter was resolved. With a sudden whoosh, Claude swept Rose into his arms, intending to leave the scene regardless of the order. Rose clung to Claude, letting him carry her away, her body trembling from the overwhelming intensity of the confrontation. In the safety of Claude's arms, he gently assured her that she was finally safe from the chaos. Later, Rose found herself in a quiet room, softly apologizing to Claude for the trouble her presence had caused. Claude pulled her into a tight embrace, asking for a moment of peace, his heart finally opening up to her. Rose was startled as her heart let out a rhythmic thump, while Claude pulled her into a sudden, intimate hug. In the warm embrace, Rose realized her physical proximity to Claude might actually allow her to guide for him. As Rose froze in Claude's arms, flustered by the sudden physical contact, the air filled with the sound of a frantic heartbeat. Looking up at him, Rose's heart continued to pound steadily, the intense emotion of the moment leaving her breathless. Claude looked at Rose with a rare vulnerability, admitting he was still clumsy when it came to handling many things. Recalling the past, Claude revealed that his sense of self was unformed when he first entered the harsh Esper Center. He confessed that his environment had taught him to interact with others only through cold suppression and absolute, unwavering control. Claude described Rose as unpredictable, admitting he was afraid that if he blinked, he would lose her like a fading dream. His cheeks tinged with red, he confessed his only instinct was to hold on to Rose as tightly as possible. The two stood in silence, the weight of Claude's honest confession palpable in the quiet, dimly lit room. Rose looked at him with wide, shimmering eyes, stunned that the fearsome Claude was finally sharing his truest feelings. Rose seized the opportunity to demand an apology for the past housework, and Claude surprisingly complied with a humble, quiet response. In a playful chibi scene, Rose then made him apologize for previously threatening to throw her into a mutant's nest. Rose suddenly found the situation amusing, wondering what other demands she could make while Claude was in this repentant mood. Rose had a sudden realization and spoke up, while Claude looked at her with a confused and questioning expression. Recalling a chubby pink piglet, Rose suspected the gourmet meals were a conspiracy aimed at increasing her guiding surface area. Claude froze, his face a mask of disbelief, etched with shock at Rose's bizarre, yet creative weight gain theory. A chibi Rose vividly explained how weight gain would theoretically make her an easier target for his constant guiding needs. Claude began to laugh at her wild imagination, while Rose remained wide-eyed and serious in her absurd line of questioning. Claude playfully questioned the logic of her theory, his amusement evident as he moved toward her again. Claude suddenly swept Rose up into his arms, teasingly suggesting they check just how much weight she had gained. Rose's face turned a deep shade of red, and she frantically demanded to be put down as Claude carried her away.